Does coffee make you anxious, sweaty, unfocused, or maybe your doctor thinks you have a crippling caffeine addiction, which I am definitely not in any way referencing for my personal life? Let me turn you on to Mantra Matcha. Mantra Matcha is ceremonial-grade matcha from a private hillside in Uji, Japan. Smooth, naturally sweet, and it gives you this calm, focused energy without the jitters. It's packed with antioxidants like more than 130 times more than regular green tea, so you feel energized and you feel good. Now, the matcha flavor isn't for everybody, but good news, Matcha has 6 infused flavors like banana cacao, strawberry lemon, cinnamon goji berry, and rosehip dragon fruit, which sounds like a name from Game of Thrones, but it's delicious. Plus, every box you buy helps provide a meal to a child through the No Kid Hungry program, which we love. Now, right now, listeners to Make It Make Sense can go to mantramatcha.com and use the code MIMS25 for 15% off. Now, that code also supports Make It Make Sense with a commission. That's how these things work. I got to legally tell you. But the good news is you'll help the show, you'll stay caffeinated, and maybe not too much. Again, that code at mantramatcha.com is MIMS25 for 15% off. Mantra Matcha, less chaos, more clarity, 2 things we could all use a little bit of right now. All right, let's get on with the show. It's Saturday, February 21st, 2026. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Herms. Now, I know that this is in your feeds or on your screens a day later than you normally get the Friday episodes, and that's because there was just so much news yesterday. I couldn't physically get my hands around this episode to get it out the door. But it is a fantastic episode because I have my very first repeat guest, back-to-back repeat guest, I should say, on the show this week. Eric Czuleger from the Under Report is back on Make It Make Sense to talk about whether or not we're going to an all-out war with Iran. Because over the last week or so, the United States has been moving in aircraft carrier groups and naval groups and scrambling fighter jets in the Persian Gulf. And then just a few days ago, we saw the largest deployment of aircraft, jets, planes that refuel jets, spy planes, bombers, the largest deployment of all of those assets the United States military has to the Middle East since the start of the global war on terror in 2002. So I wanted to have Eric back on the show, and he was kind enough to come back on the show to talk about what might be happening here, what the United States is risking right now, and just how dangerous all of this is making the entire world. But before we get into that, make sure you're following or subscribe to the show, leave a comment or a review. It really helps boost the show wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where tomorrow you'll get a brand new edition of Make It Make Nonsense, where I might become Lego famous. To figure out what I mean by that, you'll have to subscribe. It's just for paid subscribers. You can get access for just $5 a month to the Substack. And with that out of the way, let's get on with the show. Eric, thank you for being the very first back-to-back guest on the show, man. I really appreciate it. I know that we talked a lot about Iran last week, and then lo and behold, we were just ahead of the curve. Lucky us, I guess. So,
things just keep happening. That's what I've been doing.
That should be the name of this show, is things just keep happening. Yeah. Let's start here with what your thoughts have been this week as you've seen the air mobilization and the moving into the Persian Gulf of a few carriers and maybe a couple carrier groups as well as the scrambling of jets in Qatar and Riyadh. What are you watching and what are you looking for when you look at the stuff that you look at to follow this?
So there's a big difference in between the movement of forces that we had seen previously. Obviously, a carrier strike group getting planted off of the coast of Iran is an enormous gesture, and it's also a costly gesture. Of course, we no longer have that carrier strike group in the South Pacific, which is where it was previously, I believe. And of course, that's enough to get everybody's eyes on the region. But then just recently we saw this enormous airlift of, quite a few heavy-duty air assets heading towards the Persian Gulf. So these included, F-16s, F-22s, F-35s, which the joke about the F-35 is nobody knows if it's necessarily a plane or if it's just a supercomputer that happens to fly. These are incredibly exquisite systems that we are placing into not only harm's way, but into a theater where we presumably mean to use them. But there's also an enormous list of stratotankers. And of course, these are aircraft that are used for refueling operations, which to me says we're talking about long-term sustainment operations. Iran is a large place. In order to find specifically the launchers for any sort of missile attacks, we would need to have heavy ISR or intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance that's basically gridding the entire country of Iran 24/7.
Don't we already do that? Don't we already have all that ISR? I mean, I thought that's what the Office of the Director of National Intelligence is supposed to be doing.
Certainly do, but of course, more is better in this, and that's really more for dynamic strikes, right? For certain types of launchers, you will need to fuel it right then and there, and then for others, you'll need to you could just fire the missile right away. There's the sort of internal joke about how missiles are really effective weapons, but if you ever try to throw one with your hands, it's not going to work so well. So the limiting factor in terms of restraining any sort of violent power that can come out of Iran really does depend on finding missile launchers, and of course there are also fake missile launchers in real time, and then destroying them before missiles can be launched. Mm-hmm. Oh, and also we should mention the other carrier strike group, which passed recently through the Strait of Gibraltar. So that goes from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean. It appears that one just got parked off of the coast of Greece for refueling. There's a Greek island that it is sort of stationed at the moment, and I'm actually not certain at the moment. I don't know if anybody is, but it may end up hanging out in the Mediterranean. And what that could be, is just additional defensive measures for Israel. Remember, the Iron Dome is a fairly good interception system for missiles, but even with the last, the 12-day war, missiles did get through. And with missile defense, you're really just talking about a numbers game. So there's a certain amount that will always get through, and Iran has a lot of missiles. And so if a certain amount get through, that can do an enormous amount of damage to a small country.
Yeah. I was talking with somebody else today about that specific carrier group, which in it has the USS Gerald Ford, which is one of our largest aircraft carriers. It's about a fifth of a mile long, which is an insane amount. It's an insane amount of machinery and ship to have there. Is how much of that placement do you think has to do with deterring strikes or actions or attacks from Iranian proxies? I'm thinking Hezbollah off the bat there, but I know that this is now a part of the thing that we have to think about, because the president said that we are going to have some kind of limited strike, or at least that's what they're weighing. I don't know what that would look like, but that does then perk up all the other organizations and groups and, U.S. or international designated terror groups that are funded and propped up by Iran. So how dangerous of a situation are we in now?
Yeah, I think that we're in a sort of battlefield preparation phase, and we've already seen some attempts to stop these proxy groups from being able to mount any effective attacks. Just today, there was an attack on the Bekaa Valley from Israel. Bekaa Valley is an area which has traditionally been a Hezbollah stranglehold, but also a drug production area in central Lebanon. So apparently, according to the reports, this literally just happened a couple of hours ago. It was to take out some high-level leadership in Hezbollah, and to me, and of course, this also broke a ceasefire that the U.S. brokered between Lebanon and Israel. The agreement of which was that the Lebanese army would assist in the de-arming of Hezbollah, which I've spent some time in Lebanon, and that is a sort of non-starter. Hezbollah has tended to be much better organized and much better trained and much better armed than the Lebanese army itself. And so it seems that Israel, in their caution to stop any sort of belligerence from Hezbollah, has taken it on themselves to break the ceasefire and take out some leadership in Lebanon ahead of any strike that would be capable. But, there are other proxy groups, and they have been degraded in various ways. Obviously, Hamas has been degraded remarkably. I believe that the proxy groups currently operating in Iraq are actually quite functional. I was in Iraq about 3 months ago, and I had traveled through the border from the Kurdish region into the area outside of Mosul. And as I got through the border, I was greeted on the other side with huge posters of Qasem Soleimani and the Ayatollah and Nasrallah, who was the previous leader of Hezbollah. And I was pretty shocked to see Iraqi paramilitaries who were, loudly claiming their fealty to Iran.
That is interesting because as we've been talking prior to hit record on this thing, like Iran doesn't exactly export its theocracy in a way that we hear a lot about happening, in American media. We can get to the media side of this in a second here, but it does strike me as interesting that you do get sort of that military fealty in a lot of these places, and I'm wondering about the scrambling of jets and forces in Saudi Arabia and Qatar. What might happen in Yemen as troops and U.S. forces are still there. It feels like we lit a box of matches near a keg of oil right now, literally. Right,
and that really, Yemen and the Houthis are really the proxy group that I think will be the leverage which Iran will look towards because they're just well placed and they're not as degraded as some of these other networks. So, of course, the Iranian nuclear bomb, for lack of a nuclear bomb, is the fact that they're able to shut off the Strait of Hormuz. Strait of Hormuz is the entrance to the Red Sea, and it's an energy choke point through which 20% of the world's oil consumption and liquid natural gas consumption goes through. Right. Not to mention a good deal of just the stuff that the world trades. Right. And so it does two things by shutting off the Strait of Hormuz. One is it spikes oil prices. This then goes to make every action the U.S. military takes much more costly. So there's a huge cost imposition there. But then on top of that, it also spikes the prices of insuring shipments. And so you can bring global shipping to a grinding halt because everything has just become much more expensive. Iran cannot go toe-to-toe with the U.S. military, regardless of whether or not there is a coalition of the willing like there was during the global war on terror, and fight until the destruction of the United States. That simply won't happen. But what it can do is it can make it so economically painful and politically unpopular that it could greatly damage the Trump administration.
Let's talk about what's happening on the other side of Iran here. For the past, 6 to 8 months, maybe a little bit longer, Russia, Iran, and then China have been doing these sort of joint military exercises. So as the United States is going to do whatever it does, how much do you think we're going to see someone like Russia or China get involved in defending Iran in some form or capacity?
Yeah, there's been a really interesting thing happening between Russia, Iran, and China over the last couple of days. And of course, we've seen this happen in real time. So we saw snap military drills in the area outside of Bandar Abbas, which is their main port. And this is not only the main port through which the majority of supplies come into Iran, but it is the main basing area for the IRGC and their naval assets. So it is a top priority for the U.S. to strike Bandar Abbas. And just, seemingly coincidentally, it sounds like the Russians and Chinese just decided they really want to have a military drill in that area. And what that military drill was doing, so first there was an Iranian military drill that placed a Russian boat in Bandar Abbas as well. But then it expanded to be a cooperation between China, Iran, and Russia. And so from my perspective, what this is what's called a tripwire. And so the tripwire is this moment of immediate escalation if you damage a particular area, if you take out a particular target. And what would happen now is if the U.S. were to strike Bandar Abbas, which is, a very high value target for the U.S. military, well, then you're also striking Russian assets directly. You're also striking Chinese assets directly. And suddenly you're not just in a regional war with Iran, you are in a war with China and Russia.
Right. Which obviously, if Russia's involved, that involves the Russian invasion into Ukraine and the war there, which then somehow involves our European allies, which I think we should talk about here as well, because we had a coalition of the willing when it came to the global war on terror, when it came to Iraq, part 2, I guess. I don't think that's there right now. It certainly doesn't seem like there's a lot of willingness to back up aggression from the United States right now. Are you seeing any of that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the alliance structure of the U.S. has been massively degraded. And that's because the current administration has pursued what I actually think are fairly standard geopolitical goals for what our position is right now. These are things that I think have always been geopolitical priorities from the U.S. They seem to have accelerated greatly, but they're accelerating without the toolkit that we previously had, because a lot of that toolkit was basically just dumped out. So we don't have the diplomatic toolkit that we once did. In fact, foreign service officer training and recruitment is just stopped. It has not, like, they are training no new foreign service officers at the moment.
Wait. When did that start? I don't think I heard about this.
Actually, very recently, because I was going to take the test for it, and I went to sign up for the test, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're just not giving the test right now." And so it's on a complete hiring freeze at the moment. And so that greatly restrains our diplomatic corps. I've also recently seen that there are suspension of some programs at the Middlebury Institute, which is our main language training center. So, that's one toolkit. Diplomacy is one big part of our toolkit for exerting influence in the world. And then the other side is, of course, aid. And so that is now gone.
Right, that's gone.
Yeah. USA, there is no apparatus to do it. And then you think, well, at least we have an alliance structure that is robust. That is deeply constrained at this moment. We not only have pushed our relationship with Europe seemingly to the breaking point over Greenland, but we've been hectoring NATO for so long that it seems like Europe is now moving more towards a collective defense rather than a sort of U.S.-based and funded defense.
Right.
The term of art that keeps being thrown around in the geopolitical sphere, which is great because you can always just throw the word strategic in front of another word. I do this all the time. It's great. So they're calling it strategic autonomy, right?
Got it.
So essentially saying the U.S. is no longer a reliable actor, and we believe that there is an incoming threat, and therefore we need to achieve some sort of military autonomy within the next 5-10 years that does not require U.S. assistance.
What does that mean for the U.S. then? What does that mean for our place in being able to do what we used to do on a global stage? Because if we take away the soft power, the two pillars you just talked about, diplomacy and aid, we have the military pillar still, but it's weaker because we don't have these same alliances. We kind of, but don't really have the same economic advantage as we used to because of the tariffs, and that's been forcing economic allies away from us as well. So what do we really have left? Is it just the big stick of the U.S. military, and that's kind of all we have to wield?
it does seem like we have sort of turned our influence into two fairly large sticks, and it's economic protectionism, making it so cost prohibitive or market prohibitive to enter the U.S. economy is one of them, and that's to extract concessions, oftentimes from allies, it seems.
Right.
Though it looks like the Supreme Court has just weighed in on that, and maybe that will go the way of the dodo.
Right.
But
Well,
the
because
the
those
strategy
concessions were on
seems,
us. Those
yeah,
concessions were on
right, yeah,
Americans, right? We paid the $175 billion, which was the 90% of what we taken in tariffs. So like that, we paid those. So yes, but so that's one of these sticks, and the other one is the military.
yeah. The other one is the military, which is just a violent force, and it's interesting too because I've been hearing a lot of direct comparisons to Venezuela with Iran. Like, would we do something similar to Venezuela with Iran? And my answer is no, because one, the landmass is just too large to just snatch somebody out of their bed and take the leader. And also, we did not do regime change in Venezuela. So,
Importantly, right.
right. Like, the vice president is in charge. The regime and the structure of the regime is in charge. What I think that we've done there, and I know I'm hopping all over, but I think it's kind of important to benchmark Venezuela versus Iran. But what we've done there, and I think it's going to be a move that we will continue to see, unfortunately, because I think that it only works for short-term gains, is we have kept repressive structures in place in order to change the benefactors of those structures. So where the benefactors of, let's say, Venezuelan oil or resources used to be China and Iran, now we are saying, we don't really care about your governmental structure. We just want to benefit from
your oil
for the ebb in place. We want the resources. And so whatever gets us those works. Iran is a bit of a different case because it's not necessarily about drawing resources directly from Iran. I think that that's more the play for our sort of hemispheric defense model now, because short supply lines make for robust countries, basically. With Iran, I think that this is it's an acceleration of what the JCP, it's sort of a return towards a worse version of what the JCPOA was. And so the JCPOA was the original Iran nuclear deal that was brokered by the Obama administration. And I actually feel like the thesis of the JCPOA was actually quite good. It did not go into a way that became geopolitically workable. So the thesis was, look, we will relax a lot of these sanctions. We will make sure that, you are inspected by the IAEA, the sort of atomic watchdog, and we'll make sure that, your economy begins to stabilize and liberalize, and then you are slowly able to integrate into the rest of the world. And so the bargain with that was that through economic liberalization, you'll also have a sort of social liberalization.
Sure.
And it's funny to me that the U.S. is constantly shocked when countries don't start behaving like us when we install a similar economic regime.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that money that flowed into Iran ended up going to fund and make more robust the proxy network that it had. So Hezbollah gets more powerful. The Houthi rebels get more powerful. Hamas gets more powerful. The forces that are fighting on the ground, especially at that time against the Islamic State, who are trained and managed by the IRGC, they all get more powerful.
Right.
And so, shockingly, Iran did not get Starbucks on every corner at the point that the economic sanctions were relieved. Or were relieved from them. In fact, they ended up building out this base that I think from their perspective was defensive in nature and a guarantee of their security in the future. Of course, we've pulled out of that now. And what the U.S. has said is, now we want you to have absolutely no enrichment. And we also want you to reduce, if not eliminate, your missile program.
Right.
And that is, frankly, a non-starter, especially due to the fact that the U.S. did not provide any sort of sanctions relief. In this deal, the deal in Geneva, what they have said is there will be no new sanctions, not sanctions relief.
Right. It's poor negotiating, and this whole thing with Iran since Trump came back into office has struck me as just some of the worst deal making I have seen on the international stage, because it's not deal making. It's going in and saying, like, there is no deal. These are the terms. You sign it or else.
Right.
It's just global mafia, and it is.
Yeah.
It's mob tactics, and it's so strange because at least for all the flaws you just laid out of the 2015, Obama brokered nuclear deal, it did prevent them from enriching uranium to a level in which they could have a nuclear weapon. We pulled out, and there's no guarantee that they're not doing that, and they may be more motivated to do that. And it pushed them right into the arms of Russia and China, who have those capabilities already. Not that we weren't worried about them working with Russia anyway, but it just seems that in this moment, we're not even using this new airlift and this new, real escalation of military power into Iran and the threat of a limited strike. We're not using that even as some kind of bargaining chip to bring them back to the table to come to this strong arm negotiation. Strategically, I know that you said long term, it makes sense that the United States is doing this, or at least it aligns with how we're positioned right now, how this government is positioned. But in the short term, this doesn't seem real bright.
Yeah, the short term thinking has been really baffling, and I think that it's especially when you're sort of engaging in forecasting, you're rarely ever attempting to make your prediction based off of the individual. In fact, you're kind of not supposed to. You're always, trying to look at whatever the geopolitical chessboard looks like and eliminating the moves that would be either too dumb or too catastrophic, and then looking at what the constraints say that must happen. And I think that this particular administration is a good time to actually look at the individual and, what are the things that we know our administration loves or our administration goes on to talk about so much. The line that I keep hearing is, I stopped 8 wars, and that is fundamentally inaccurate.
Right.
The Donald Trump did not stop 8 wars. But I think the acceleration of the timeline is really more about self-aggrandizement rather than playing a smart game.
Mm-hmm. In also, past performance as a predictor of this president, he is transactional. And so I'm curious to know, and this might be a thing we can't know right now. I'm curious to know what the payoff he's looking for is from this new escalation. It's not oil. It's not like Venezuela. And I've heard people say that Venezuela was actually a precursor to this thing in Iran because it gets us Venezuelan oil and all this stuff. And so if they close the Strait of Hormuz, then we have all this other oil. I don't think I agree. That's some 4D chess thinking that I think rationalizes two separate ideas.
I think the problem with that thinking is, and it's something that unless you study it constantly, like, you don't really realize that, like, the physical infrastructure to simply replace, Iranian oil for Venezuelan oil or vice versa, it just doesn't exist.
Right.
So,
right.
You're talking about decades of creating pipelines or creating shipping routes, so it's not like you can just we don't have, like, some enormous like strato tanker that can just go slurp up Iranian oil and
Right,
spray
right.
it out all over Texas, and suddenly the price of gas is 30 cents.
Right. It's not the Daffy Duck cartoon. We don't have a faucet on a pick that we can stick in the ground and turn on and off in different
Right.
countries. That's just not how this works.
Yeah, like one spigot is labeled Iran, and then the other one is, and it's like, now we get to turn this one. It just doesn't
Right.
work that way.
Right.
Which again, it's like, short term thinking for long term gains is something that it appears the administration believes that they are able to accomplish, when in actual reality, that's just not how things work.
Mhm.
And so I think that there's also this sort of political element that is happening too. I'm not, huge into into theories that, well, this is all a big distraction from the domestic strife that's going on right now
Yeah.
over the leaked email, or not even the leaked emails, the revealed emails and the files. But what I do know is that, we are staring down the barrel of midterm elections, and it looks like the Republicans have the potential to really lose a lot of ground. And because of that, a win needs to happen. And what that win looks like, I don't know. On the domestic front, it doesn't look like there's a really great avenue towards having this public moment. And so I think that there is potentially a belief in Washington that says, well, if we do something militarily that is, particularly astounding, if we cut an incredible deal with Iran over the nuclear program, then potentially that can message back home and say, see, this was all part of the plan the whole time.
Sure. I think that's an avenue they would take if that's what happens, but I don't think they're aiming for that. I think so much of what is happening around Iran, I think is them being kind of high on their own supply. That the president is clearly not fully tethered to reality. That doesn't have to do exactly with him. You've got quite a few actors around him that have their own aims and and goals to what they want to do. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, among them, as a full-on Christian dominionist, Christian nationalist, who really likes the idea of sending in what he sees as a Christian military into a Muslim theocracy, as a new crusade or whatever.
It's gonna blow his mind when he finds out there are actually Christians and Jews living in Iran. Like, it's gonna blow his mind.
It's gonna blow his little American flag tie right off his body. I think a lot of this is the short-term thinking, is that they don't see it as short-term thinking. They see it as what everybody is saying, because that's how big their bubble is. And I think in terms of like your background in terms of like psychological operations, it's almost like they're kind of doing one on themselves in a little way.
Well, I think that this is one of the problems with autocratic leadership. I mean, I have to defend autocrats at some point. I mean, look, every style of governance has both its the things that it's particularly good at and the things that it's really, really bad at. And the bargain of democracy is that it's going to be slow, it's going to be combative, but presumably through fighting it out over each of these issues, we're going to create not only the most robust system possible, because everybody has a hand in it and everybody has a stake in it, but we're also going to get all the bad ideas out and maybe settle on one that like everybody doesn't love, but everybody doesn't hate. That's the bargain of democracy. It's a little bit shaky at the moment. But with autocracy, what you can do is just what you want real fast.
Yeah.
And the problem with autocrats is they end up having this sort of calcified structure around them where they are always right and they can never adjudicate things from an outside perspective. We've even seen this recently with the purge in China. Xi Jinping purged his top military generals because they didn't agree with him, presumably. Of course, we don't know exactly, but it appears that that's the way that it's happened. And the real Achilles heel of autocracy in this way is that if you never believe that, or if you don't believe that you're capable of being wrong, you're going to make some really silly choices.
Yeah.
And I think that we've pushed ourselves into a position where the probability of silliness is going through the roof. And regardless of what happens, it could be diplomatically or it could be militarily, we know one thing is certain, and that is that the Trump administration has to walk away from whatever happens and call it an astounding success.
Right. They have to. There is no loss. There is no version of anything that could happen here that won't be considered a complete and full mission accomplished.
Well, consider what happened after Midnight Hammer, right? So Midnight Hammer, they bombed a bunch of the nuclear sites. And these, of course, are the nuclear sites that we know about. And this is also another failing of the JCPOA, was the fact that we bargained for inspections of the nuclear sites that we know about. But of course, there are other nuclear sites in Iran. And we didn't ask for full disclosure of all of the nuclear sites. So we bombed those nuclear sites, and we stated publicly, or at least the administration, I didn't state it. They don't ask me, but the administration stated publicly, they were decimated, and it's there is no Iran nuclear program again. Well, clearly not. If we're looking at military action again.
I think that's a good place to move into sort of the final things I want to talk about here. Let's start with the nuclear question. I mean, anytime Iran is involved, there are worries about what happens next. They're closest with Russia. They're closest with China. And then currently, I know you just put a video out about this too, that Europe is trying to figure out its own nuclear arms structure because it doesn't think it can rely on the United States anymore. And when nukes are involved, everything is, ratcheted up to 11 because it's nukes. So what happens here?
Yeah, the nuclear question is one that I'm shocked more people are not talking about right now. And the reason that we are now seeing outwardly conversations about starting up nuclear programs or extending nuclear umbrellas. It was during the Munich Security Conference, which just happened, where I believe Germany was speaking about negotiations for extending the French nuclear umbrella. There are conversations about Japan nuclearizing or South Korea nuclearizing. And of course, all of these countries are able to spin up a nuclear program and probably have a nuclear weapon rapidly. But part of the reason for this is because of this issue of what they call, strategic autonomy, which is since the U.S. has become a more and more unreliable actor in just a year, then it only makes sense in terms of the long-term thinking of Europe that we have to create a security framework that does not rely on the U.S. because clearly that can be used as a cudgel against us.
Right.
If we are saying, well, we'll leave NATO unless we can colonize Greenland, I guess.
Right.
To me, it's really interesting as an object lesson in, is this an infinite game or is this a finite game? Global security should be an infinite game. And the way that you play an infinite game is you win if you keep playing. But if you are playing a finite game, there is a winner and there is a loser. And so if you are talking about security, especially in the globalized world, it must be security that is inclusive of everyone. Otherwise, you kick off these new nuclear arms races. And funny enough, I keep hearing people in my comments, they're meaning to make a video about it, but saying, oh, just give nukes to everybody. And I'm like, I can't tell if you're joking. But, there's a problem with this, obviously. And that problem is that if everybody has nukes, they're going to get them on different time frames.
Yeah.
And what it does is it increases the incentive to enact violence against potentially a country that you have conflict with before they get a nuclear arm. We're literally seeing this play out Iran and the United States right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I had a question, and then you said that someone was like, "Give everyone a nuke," and it like just threw me because it's the most insane thing.
It's
It's
really
Fallout. What is this?
It's the geopolitics of Oprah. You get a nuke and you get a nuke. Hopefully that does not happen. There's one thing that I think is really important to mention about Iran at this exact moment. So, we've got this. I believe his exact words were 10, maybe 15 days to come back with a deal that the U.S. can sign off on, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is nothing has been offered on the U.S. side that would be helpful for Iranian stability. Right. And so Iran is sort of forced into this moment of saying, well, look, our economy is in shambles. We've had nothing but, incredibly violent domestic unrest for the last couple of months. Now you are trying to entirely disarm us and change our regime very publicly.
Right.
But at that point, it leaves very few options that aren't incredibly violent and incredibly dramatic. And that could look like shutting off the Strait of Hormuz. It could look like activating the network of proxies. Of course, many of the proxy networks have been degraded dramatically. Right. But the U.S. has an enormous attack surface.
Not that prediction is entirely your game, but you sort of have a couple options you think the United States might have here going forward, or they might take. Do you think one of them, I want to start with, do you think one of them is an actual like boots on the ground invasion, or do we stay in the air and in the sea and that's where this stops?
Yeah, there is this sort of limited strike that we keep hearing about, which I'm assuming is going to be delivered via unicorn, because there's this magical limited strike that I just keep hearing about that somehow is going to topple the Islamic Republic and change out the leadership in Iran with a Hamiltonian Democrat that completely aligns with American values and Starbucks on every corner.
Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like. I don't think any serious person has written or said anything about what this limited strike could look like.
I certainly haven't seen anything.
Yeah. Once we see unicorns moving into the Persian Gulf, we'll know it's close. Right. But the closest I can say towards something that would be devastating to Iran would be a strike on Bandar Abbas. But of course, we've seen that there's China and Russia has moved into there. Right. So I have a great deal of skepticism that you can fight this war strictly from the air. I have even more skepticism that you can put boots on the ground in any meaningful way in a country of 80 million people. Right. That is an ocean of mountains with the desert on the inside.
That is essentially surrounded by a combination of 3 different mountain ranges, and in the middle is a desert.
Like Iran doesn't defend its borders. It doesn't have to. It has always been this stronghold of mountains, and when you have a nation inside a stronghold of mountains, you get pretty good at projecting power outwards. That's why the Persian Empire was what it was, because very easy to go attack on the outside, but then very hard to have somebody attack you on the inside. So then, I don't see any. I think it would be abysmally foolish, and I think it would just be unworkable for the United States, especially going it alone or potentially with Israeli help, to occupy Iran. I believe that there's actually numbers on this. So if you want to occupy a country, in your spare time, what you're gonna need is, I believe, about I think the numbers are something like 12 military/security professionals per 1,000 people, right? For just policing forces, you go 4 security for every 1,000 people. So now scale that up to 80 million people.
80 million.
Now scale that up to 80 million people in mountains. And also we have 2 heavily defended breakaway regions, in Balochistan and in the Kurdish Iranian area that will have their own needs and their own languages. It's not going to happen.
So basically, our best case scenario here is that we are pulling the tail of a cat whose teeth we can't see.
That's a good way of putting it, and potentially has explosive teeth.
Good. Right, of course, right.
The thing is, so if I'm Iran in this circumstance, I'm looking for options which will, both sides really are looking for options which will push the other side into the negotiation table, but under duress, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, shutting off the Strait of Hormuz is certainly a workable option for Iran. There have been quite a few war games that have been played in which it becomes incredibly difficult to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and that's because they can mine it, they can attack with small boats. But the other thing that we're not really considering, and I'm actually surprised that it's not in the news more often, is that drone technology from Iran has gotten remarkably good. The drones that they are producing have been consistently going to the war in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sure there have been war games that have included drone technology, but I don't think that you can destroy an aircraft carrier, but you can certainly harass them, and you can certainly do that at a huge discount. If you're going to destroy an F-35 with a, couple $1,000 drone, well, then you made money on that deal.
Right, you definitely did it. So, we're just entering potentially into a conflict of annoyance on both sides and waiting for one side to blink and come back to the table of negotiating.
Well, I think it's just a matter of how much pain we can put onto either side until people return to the negotiating table. But that's the best case solution, unfortunately.
Sure.
The worst case, and one that I think is remarkably likely, is that this simply spins out of control. As there is a ladder of escalation, and it starts with a disagreement, and then it goes to shows of force, and I think we're seeing that now with military training exercises. And then, of course, it goes to a limited strike, this limited strike that potentially could happen at some point. But that point, then suddenly people either double down or something unexpected happens and things spin out of control. And that's what I'm deeply concerned about. Where that would happen, I have no idea. And I would hesitate to even forecast how that spinning out of control could happen. But it could happen.
Absolutely. And just right now, there just doesn't seem to be a lot of off-ramp on this road of escalation we're on, certainly.
That's a perfect way of saying it. Yes, there is a lack of off-ramps seemingly for everyone. And diplomatically speaking, you want to provide as many off-ramps as possible.
Right.
So I don't know, the Iranians are now off to do their homework and come up with a deal that potentially the U.S. could sign. I don't know what that would look like. Because it seems that they want all or nothing, and it seems that they, no matter what, they're going to call this a win. So does that mean that we put another time barrier on this, that we're going to delay any sort of reconstruction of nuclear capabilities or uranium enrichment? Does it mean that they have to make a sort of full confession of all of their nuclear sites and allow the IAEA in? I don't know from, the Witkoffs and the Trumps of the world, what would look like a good deal to them other than complete surrender.
I mean, I think that also if Iran wanted to, they could melt down a little bit of gold and make a nice trophy and give Trump a peace trophy, and I think that might do it. I think that might work.
For all of the problems they give millennials about how we got participation trophies, seems like boomers like them too.
My parents have all of mine still. I don't have any of them back here. I don't keep any of them, right?
I mean, I think that there. I actually believe that there is there's a possibility of using the let's say assumed personal gravitas of Donald Trump to make a deal. In fact, actually, last year I wrote right before Midnight Hammer. I wrote for a professor of mine. I wrote a policy paper talking about how the the smartest policy that you could take would actually be have a high-level meeting between Donald Trump and the Iranian regime. And the reason being is he does not care about political capital. He would be the only one who could actually do that. And he likes being the one who can say, I'm the only one who could have done that.
Right. It'd be flattering to him. Absolutely. Right. And that's how you get him in a room. That, a 100%.
And then you just replace Obama's name on the JCPOA with Trump's name, and he likes naming. This would be a workable solution. And then Midnight Hammer happened. And,
and then now it's a little bit off the table. The last thing.
Into the incinerator.
Keep it for posterity. You never know. It might come back up. You never know. The last thing I'm going to ask you, because I don't want to keep you too long. What do you look for in the gaps in the coverage of something like this that the listeners can do themselves? Because I think that's going to be really important as this plays out over the weekend and into next week.
When looking at the news, especially in the U.S., I actually even find it hard to sift through to find any information. The majority of it really is bombast and partisan posturing. So I find it really difficult to not only find information that is reasonable, but to not be generally upset. And I think that's a really sort of important thing for your listeners to clock, is that there is, it's very helpful for people who do not mean us well to have us emotionally and mentally dysregulated. And I think that the most important thing that we can really do is descend into the specifics of the situation greatly, to not take an all or nothing point of view, and to consistently ask the dumb question. And the dumb question is, why are they doing that? Why that place? Who's this person? What do they want? Because otherwise we're having our information handed to us with an enormous dose of partisan pandering. And frankly, it doesn't make for a good mental space, I find. But it also polarizes us so deeply that it becomes hard to have a reasonable conversation about what's actually happening. And, nobody's going to make a great decision politically or strategically if they think that they are just on the verge of, exploding into a fireball. And for at least from when I'm speaking with, my followers, it really does seem like there's a good deal of anxiety and pain that is out there that says, well, like, we're just on the verge of a catastrophic conflict. And I think that we've gotten into a place where cynicism and sometimes nihilism is the most logical choice, but I also find that it's the laziest choice. And all of these things are understandable. They are, and people can arm themselves with information about, like, how did we get here with Iran in the first place? How did the Ayatollah come to power? How did the U.S. have a hand in, creating the regime that is now seeking to dethrone? All of that, all those nuances, all those specific things get me out of any sort of emotional state, and they get me into a really curious state. And I think that we need to be curious about not only what our own actions are going to be, but also about what our perceived adversaries' actions are. Because I don't think that, I don't think it's helpful. I grew up in the global war, during the generation of the global war on terror. And I remember feeling, sort of baffled when people would just sort of wave their hand and say, they're all crazy over there. And that's not the case. People are reasonable actors. And I think we need to do our best to look at things from their perspective and find the most boring news. Find boring news. That's the key to the key to not losing your mind when you look at things in geopolitics is, like, read about oil prices, read about real estate indexes. Like, the more boring the news, the better. That's the way to arm yourself against being propagandized.
I had a high school teacher who, when he talked about international conflicts, he had this line where he said what ends these wars and what ends revolutions is not actually the person with the biggest stick, except for one time, which is World War II. The rest of it is radical curiosity on the part of a lot of people who have just a little bit more power than the average person, and that has this domino effect. And
what an incredible phrase. Yeah,
it's an incredible phrase. And it's not that like their positions are radical. It's that they are so committed to the idea of understanding the world that they're currently living in that they then can have an impact. And like it is a through line for my own personal life, and I think one that is really important, especially right now, to have when things feel so out of control. Everything is knowable, everything is doable. You just gotta do it. That's all.
Well, I think that embracing radical curiosity is just harder work.
It's work. It's hard.
And people got busy lives. But I think that if you want to, be a good actor and a good participant in the political ecosystem that we're operating in, it's incumbent upon us to educate ourselves deeply about whatever we're sounding off about, because there are so many people and so many organizations that are more than happy to hand you a menu of your new beliefs. And my guess is that they will not be reflective of what you want or believe as a human being, but they will also benefit those people who are making a lot of money off of that. Mm-hmm. One of my mentors in geopolitics said something along the lines of, if you feel enraged or if you feel like you are about to die because you've read the news, then somebody is making money off of you.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good place to end this, man. A little bit of tools to handle the next week here as we go into this thing. So
I think there's going to be a lot that happens in the next week, and of course, always happy to come back on. This has been great.
It's always fantastic to have you on. I would really like that I don't need to have you on as a three-peat guest, but if it comes to that, I will definitely give you a call.
Hopefully not. I hope that Iran turns up with the trophy and we can call off our carrier strike.
And that's it. Yeah, that's it. Well, Eric, man, thank you so much for coming on again. I really appreciate it.
You as well. Any old time.
I want to thank Eric again for coming back on the show. Like I said at the end of that conversation, hopefully I don't have to have him back on for a third week in a row. But if you want to check out all the great work that he is doing, his brand new podcast, The Under Report, the newsletter, The Under Report, follow him on social media. All of those links will be in the show notes to this episode. And that is it for today's episode. Please rate or review wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. And of course, follow along on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod. All one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant_Herms on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you next week.